Welcome to the Mem Sql Developer Livestream. Today we're going to do database migrations. And database migrations is really cool. I've been studying this for some time. In database migrations, we generally have two approaches, although for the most part, a lot of the approaches are hybrid with the other one as well. In one sense, we have a state-based mechanism where we dump all of the schema of all of our objects into files. So if I have a file called product catalog, I'll have product catalog.sql, and that file, I'll just keep updating that file as we go. The other is a migrations-based approach where we have scripts that alter it. So anytime I change the product catalog table, I'll have a new script that describes how we change it. Now, both the state-based mechanism, the one where we just have one file, and the migrations-based approach where we have files detailing each change work great in different scenarios and for different purposes. And again, we may indeed create a mechanism that is hybrid between them. In a state-based mechanism, I can take a look at the file and I can see what changed. I can see when the column appeared. In a migrations-based approach, I know that these changes have worked in all the other environments because I'm running the exact same script in the next environment. So because both of them have their places, sometimes we need a hybrid approach where maybe we're keeping track of state and we're building migrations, or perhaps we're keeping track of state for stored procedures and views, and we're doing migrations for tables. Or maybe we're doing migrations for some of the heavy lifting pieces, like splitting a table or combining a column. And we'll do state-based things for all the normal pieces. So let's dig in and dig in through all the things. What we did last week was we modified the setup.sql file. And setup.sql was interesting in that it assumed that we had no database and it created a database. Now, we just dumped our database and started over, and that's really not a great approach. So let's take a look at database migration tools and see how we can do it. So here's, for example, a state-based database migration tool. I'll show all of the things I have on the database that I've chosen on the left. I'll have the things that I've chosen on the database on the right. I can click on each one and I can see, in this case, the nickname column got added to this table. And then once I push the go button, the deploy button, it will infer the SQL that it needs to be able to run between the two systems. This is that state-based mechanism. And in fact, this is SQL Compare. That's the tool that I generally reach for. And SQL Compare Redgate does have a SQL Compare and SQL Data Compare edition for MySQL. But unfortunately, it makes assumptions about the database. Compare and Data Compare are really good at digging deep into the database to understand its capabilities. And in this case, Mem Sql isn't that compatible with MySQL. One of the big things that tools like this make assumptions about is that they can reach into the MySQL table or MySQL database to get information about the database setup, the database cluster. And in this case, the MySQL database doesn't exist in the Mem Sql database, so we can't use these tools. I also reached for Flyaway. Flyaway is a great tool that is a migrations-based mechanism. There's a PR open for some time about getting Mem Sql support into Flyaway. It was created in 2016, so sadly we can't use Flyaway as well. So I went reaching for another tool and I found DB Migrate. DB Migrate is a cool tool that does migrations-based approach. And the beauty here is that we can write the SQL that we need. So we can do very specific things for Mem Sql. For example, Mem Sql has more data types than MySQL. And so as we're doing our migrations, if we were just looking at it like this, then we may not have all of the pieces that we need to understand all the things if we're deeply inspecting and assuming. So that's what's really cool about DB Migrate is we can do all of the pieces do all the SQL scripts that are very specifically Mem SQL scripts, and then run them. I also like that DB Migrate has a mechanism of up and down, add all of the migrations, but also remove all of the migrations. And we may need that quite a bit of times as we futz with our database to get it just so. So I've spun up Mem Sql. I love this thing spinning up Mem Sql in Docker that allows us to just really quickly spin up a Docker compose file and get our database up to speed. So we've got that database up, and I did a drop database and create database, which allows us to start clean. So yeah, we don't have any other stuff in our database right now. That's perfect. Now here in our SQL script, here's our setup.sql. We create the database, we use the database, we create the catalog, we insert the first thing into the product catalog, and then we select stuff from the catalog. Now we just modified this file last time to do all the things. What we did was we moved the description field into the subtitle field. We added a new price field, an image field, and a new description field. And in particular, the price field is not null. So those are the steps that we'll need to do as we build out the migrations. So we'll need to do that. First step though, we need to go find that original file inside Git. Well, that's cool. Let me stick my notes over here. First stop is to go figure out where that is. Git log -- one line. Oh, git log one line. There we go. So here's the commit that we did last week, and that's where we modified the SQL file. So let's look at this commit, git show this commit setup.sql. That's the file at the step previously. So I'm going to go grab this. Let's set that in place here. I'll just call it setup old.sql. Okay. So now we know what we started with and what we ended with. Now we need to build the migration script that will get us from here to there. If we want, we can go diff these two just to get a feel for it. I'll use beyond compare here, though we could use any tool. Yep, we turned, let me swap these. We turned description into subtitle, and then we added price, image, description, and then in the insert step, we needed to modify some things. That's cool. So first step in getting DB Migrate to work is to npm install it. npm install. I've done that previously into this new project that I call SQL. So here's that SQL package JSON. We've got DB Migrate right there. Cool. Next step is to create a let's go to the docs here. The next step is to create a database.json that specifies where our database is. And the cool thing is that we can specify multiple environments. So we could say, here's our dev environment, here's our prod environment, and then you could run DB Migrate up as part of a continuous integration build to get your next environment to have all of those details as well. That's really cool. After that, in that, you can then specify the driver and the database, and it has MySQL support straight away. That's perfect. So here in, I created a database JSON and specified all of the details. Now, in theory, you can specify environment variables like this, and it should pick up the .env file, but it didn't in my case, and I'm not quite sure why. So I don't like that. Here's my database details. So I'll create another file here, and I'll say new file database sample.json. And in my database sample, I will specify that I'll just leave these blank. Or maybe I'll put in things that might make sense as defaults. Localhost. The database of Acme is okay. User, your username here. password, your password here, and I'll check in this sample file. In the README, we'll describe, hey, copy the sample file into a regular file, remove -sample, and fill in your details. Okay, now that we've got our database.json, then we can do db migrate up. Well, kind of. If I say db migrate, then it'll go, well, db migrate isn't a command that I know. db migrate is here inside SQL, inside node modules, .bin. Here's that db migrate command that it'll run, which is perfect. I've got it right there. So how do I add it to, I could say node cd SQL. I could say node modules .bin db migrate up, and that would definitely work. Let's go do it, and it'll do all the things. Awesome. But that's kind of a pain. So let's say set path equals, we'll put in the existing path, semicolon, node modules .bin. And now in our path is that .bin folder. And so now we can say db migrate up. That's cool. Now we can do some experiments and just kind of futz with it and get db migrate to do what we need it to do. One other thing that I did in here was in my package.json, I created scripts, db up and db reset. db up will migrate up, db migrate down will migrate down, and db migrate reset will migrate all the way down to nothing. So the cool thing then is we can say npm run db reset, and it will run db migrate, and now we don't need that path hack. The path hack was great in getting us to the point where we could run the tool, and now we can say npm run db up, and it will just do all the things. Now I like that you can pass in a third argument here saying how many migrations you want to run or to what depth. I've generally noticed that I just do all because I want to go all the way up or all the way down. One of the things db migrate can do is create a database. But in our case, we specifically wanted to create a database that had a specific number of partitions and maybe some other details associated with that. And db migrate isn't specifically good at that. So we will need to create our database on our own straight away. But then once we do that, then we can connect to that database here and run and do what we need to do. The first step that db migrate does is try to connect to that database. And if that database doesn't exist yet, yeah, db migrate is going to fail. Okay, so we have our database, and we have no tables in our database, which is perfect. We haven't created, no database selected. Let's select our database, and let's show tables. I built a Chrome plugin that will actually move the button down here because that's where I expected it to be. So that's pretty cool. Show tables. We have no tables. Oh, we do have a migrations table. Let's take a look at the migrations table. Now this table doesn't have anything in it, but we can kind of see the name, the run-on, ID. This is the table where the database keeps track of the migrations that it's run. So when db migrate starts, it will go look through its list of migrations that it has. It will look through the migrations that it's already run, and it then only needs to run the ones that it hasn't run yet. That does mean if you find a typo in your migration, you need to create a new migration to go fix it. You can't really do the old one, change the old one, because the old one may have already been run. Okay, but we don't have this catalog table in place. So our first step then will be to create the catalog. db migrate create catalog add. Okay, now one other trick that I did here is I set the SQL file parameter. And what the SQL file parameter does, which is really cool, here's that JavaScript file that will run the migration. And in this JavaScript file, it's actually just going to go reach into a SQL file and grab the SQL file and run it. Same thing for the down process, the process of removing this migration. It will just go reach into that SQL file and run it. So now we have some SQL files. We have one that is for down, and we have one that is for up. So what do we need to do to add this thing into place? Well, let's go look at our old table, and here's what we need to do to add that into place. Well, what would we need to do to remove this? Let's go into the down one. We can say drop table catalog. That's cool. DB migrate up. So it said, hey, I haven't run this one migration. Let me go run it. And now if we come back to our database, we can take a look at the tables in our database, and we see that we have that catalog. That's perfect. Let's do a DB migrate down. And now that table is gone. Show tables, and we no longer have that table. Perfect. It looks like our migration worked. Now, one of the things to keep in mind as you're doing migrations, it's really easy to forget the down migration. And yeah, there's definitely a case to be made of rolling forward instead of rolling back, especially because the back process usually isn't tested as well. The migrate down process isn't tested as well. And if you migrate up and fail, migrate down may make it worse. Arguably, if migrate up fails, you should probably stop, take manual intervention, and get it to a safe spot. Roll forward into a new up state that is correct. But in this case, I really love the paradigm of being able to do up and down. One of the things that I do to validate that I'm doing up and down is I'll take a snapshot of my database, then I'll run all the ups, then I'll run all the downs, then I'll take a second snapshot of my database and compare the schemas. That's where something like the state-based tool can be great, to be able to say, hey, are those two schemas the same? We're not going to do that in this case. In this case, we'll just keep running up and down a bunch until we get to where we need to go. But now that we've got the table created, then next step, let's go db migrate create catalog add catalog insert test product. There we go. So our next step here in the setup old was to insert this test product into the database. So test product down, test product up. Here's the thing we need to do to add it. We insert into the catalog this test product. Here, what do we do to delete it? Well, we don't have a primary key here. We can make some assumptions about the primary key that it got auto-assigned, but at best, that's an assumption. And if we migrate up and then migrate down and migrate up, then the primary key definitely will be different. So let's say delete from form, from catalog where product code equals test prod. Now we're just going to run this SQL. We're not going to, check to see that it deleted one or do anything else. We're just going to go delete it. Okay, so db migrate up. Now by default, it's only going to run one migration, so it'll only run the create table migration. It did run both of them. Perfect. So it created it and it inserted the data into the database. Let's take a look. Select star from catalog. And now we've got our test product with all of the details. If we look at the migrations table, we now see that we have two migrations. One to add the catalog table and one to add the test product into the catalog table. They've both been run already. So if we now go say db migrate up, then it successfully does nothing. Perfect. db migrate reset. Let's migrate all the way down. So now it's going to delete the test product. It's going to drop the table. And if we come back into our database, now let's look at the migrations table, and it is empty. We've run no migrations. If we go look for the product catalog, it doesn't exist. That's perfect. db migrate up. And now it's done all of the things. So now we can look at our migrations. We see both of them are in place. If we look at our catalog, we see all the fields are in place, and we've got the first row of data. So that's great. We got back to the original spot where we had created this old database. We have our table in place. We have our catalog. We do want to create the database, and we'll need to do that outside of our migrations tool because our migrations tool specifically doesn't understand creating databases. But that's okay. The next step is to get towards our new database. Let me close to the right. Close these as well. Now in our new database, we move description to subtitle, and then we add these 3 columns. We could do that all in one big migration, but the code to add a column or to change a column, each of those is one SQL command, and so we would have a migration that would do 4 different SQL commands. Together with maybe adding the data, that migration is starting to get pretty complex. Let's instead take a step back and do one thing at a time. First, let's rename the description column to the subtitle column. So renaming the, let me go find my notes. Rename. There we go. Okay, so we want to rename the description column to the subtitle column. Let's come back in here and create a new migration. db migrate db migrate create catalog desk subtitle. Something that's descriptive enough that we can understand it later. And we could put comments in our code to say, here's what we're doing here, but I think we're good. So what do we do on the way down? Alter table catalog, drop column subtitle. Yeah, it does remove the subtitle column, but really what we want to do is we want to rename it back. So instead of this, we will do change column subtitle to description. Great. So now the subtitle column will go back to the description column and everything is fine. Here in the up process, let's say alter table catalog, change column description to subtitle. Subtitle. Okay. And then let's also say alter table catalog, modify subtitle varchar 512 null. Now this isn't absolutely necessary, but let's just double check that it's in the right type. And at that point, now we know that we're good. Now the interesting thing here is that both in the old one we had a nullable varchar 512, and in the new one we had a nullable varchar 512. So yeah, it didn't actually change. But there's a mechanism for renaming a column, and there's a mechanism for changing the type of the column. That's how we get up, and then here's how we get back down. We'll rename it back. db migrate up. We can come back to our database and let's select star from catalog, and we see that we have that new subtitle column. Perfect. Now in this case, we didn't need to change any data because the subtitle column is what the subtitle column is. We were misusing the description column as a subtitle all along, so the data is perfect. Cool. db migrate up. Nope, db migrate down. Let's go double check that we can get back down. And now let's take a look at our catalog, and it's back to description. Perfect. Now db migrate down will default to only running a single migration, so we were able to do that in a really elegant way. db migrate up, and our migration worked just fine. Let's go back to our database, and now it's back to subtitle. Okay, looking at our diff again, we renamed description to subtitle, and then we created this price that is not null. Okay, so db migrate create catalog price. Cool. So with our price, the down is going to be really easy. Alter table catalog, drop column price. Problem solved. The up is a little bit more involved. We'll start out with alter table catalog, add column price, decimal, not null. And here's what's really cool. Because we're just typing in the SQL that we need, it's not trying to infer it. We can use these data types that Mem Sql provides that maybe MySQL doesn't. Decimal, text. We'll use some of each of those. That's cool. Okay, so we created this price column, but as we create this price column, let's run catalog. We're going to create this price column, and it can't be null, but what do we do about the existing data? Now, typically what I'll do in this case is I'll say add column as null, set default value, and then modify column to not null. Now, unfortunately, in the distributed nature of Mem Sql, we can't change a column from null to not null. It's just kind of the way that Mem Sql works. That's totally fine. So we won't be able to do this. Instead, we'll say it's not null and default 0. Cool. The bummer part is if you go to insert a record and you didn't pass the price field, we're going to set it to 0. That's not great, but it'll make this migration pass. The other thing that we can do, which is really cool, is we can say after subtitle. Now it'll put it in the right place in our table the way we expect. Okay. db migrate up. That worked. Let's take a look at our database and see if we've got our new price column. Yep, we have our new price column. That's great. Now let's do a db migrate down and see if we lose our price column. It looks like we do. Perfect. Now let's go db migrate up. Oh, you know what? I probably didn't want that price to be 0 forever, especially in the test product. So let's say update catalog set price equal 12.34 where product code equals test product. Is that the right one? Test prod. I was wrong. Okay. Test prod. Now we've got this set, so we're altering our default thing. We might want to even set more content into place. But we've got our price set on our default. db migrate up. So, of course, we've got a new price now that is 12.34. Nope. We just fell into that exact trap. If I select star for migrations, here's all the migrations we've already run. Now, it's tempting to say, oh, well, I'll just go delete this row and then it'll redo it. Well, kind of. We haven't made our SQL reentrant, so it's going to try to add the price column a second time. It's going to fail, and it's going to get stuck. So instead, let's say db migrate down. That'll remove the price column. db migrate up. That'll add the price column. And now if we come back into our catalog, we can see that we have that price set. This only works if you haven't committed yet, which is why running all of these migrations locally first could be a really good way to catch things. Okay, so we've got our price column. We've set our data into place. This is great. Next step, let's go add the image column. Now this one is nullable, so we won't need to do a whole lot to migrate other rows, but we can do some interesting things here. db migrate create catalog image. Okay, we have that JavaScript file that we have been ignoring all along. We have the image down and we have the image up. Okay, create alter table catalog create add column the image. It's nullable. Let's say after price. That's cool. db migrate up. And now we have our image column. Well, we haven't set the data yet, and we forgot to do the db migrate down part. So now that we've got this thing replace with your SQL commands, now we're stuck. db migrate up will fail. db migrate down will fail. Yeah. So let's come in here and let's talk about what would we do to do this. Alter table, drop column, image. That's the thing that, alter table catalog. That's the command that we want to run. And so to get back in, I don't know, compliance with our database, we right now don't have this image column run, but we do have an image column in our database. We can think of this as database drift. We've drifted away from the known state of our schema. So let's run this down migration manually just to get back into a known state. And now if we look at our catalog, we can see that we don't have that image column and we're ready to migrate again. And this is where where the state-based approach and the migrations-based approach kind of conflict. We use the migration-based approach, and so database drift can be decently traumatic. In the state-based approach, it will notice that our database is out of alignment, and it will put it back in alignment straight away. Some hybrid tools then will do the migration-based approach and validate that the state is as they expect, failing if it doesn't. Okay, db migrate up, and now we've got our price column in place. Let's go check our database. Yep, our image column is in place. We have run the image migration. You know what? We didn't set the data in place. So let's come back into this up migration and let's say, we're about to modify our migration. It's already been run in our database. Let's undo this migration first. db migrate down. Okay, now we know that this migration hasn't been run. Now we can begin altering our migration. So we do want to change this. We want to say update catalog set image equals to that thing where product code equals test prod. Let's go grab the image from the setup that we have here. Here's the image that we want to run. Hide, hide. That's not it. There we go. Nope, that's not it. Image up. There we go. Image up. We want to set the image to that. Now we know we haven't run this migration yet. So now that we've updated that data, we don't need to do anything in the down to unset it, because dropping the column will do that. Arguably, those are two different migrations, but adding the column and setting its data, to me, feels decently atomic-ish. db migrate up. Great. Let's take a look at our catalog, and now we have the price and we have the image. Okay. So next up, description text. This is one of the types that MySQL doesn't have, so I'm glad that we can just create SQL commands and just get db migrate to run them. db migrate create catalog description. db migrate create catalog description. Now, arguably, we would have done this step right after renaming the old description into place, the old description into subtitle, so that any app that was using the description field would already have it. But we're going to commit all of these things together, and we're going to get db migrate to migrate the entire database from start to finish. And so it will run all of these migrations together. So though we could reorder them and do interesting things, in this case we'll not. What's the order that they use? Well, it's the order of the dates here. It's just, alphabetically. So because it prepends it with the date and time, then that's the order that it's going to run. If we wanted to reorder these migrations, we would have to, spend a lot of time reordering files. And technically, it's not the SQL files date time, it's the JavaScript files date time. So we would need to rename 3 files for each change. I found it generally easier with db migrate just to create them in the right order. And I have gotten decently far down the road where I've put them in the wrong order. So then I just copy those files out. I create the migrations as empty in the right order, and then I just copy their content into place. Kind of a mess, though. Okay, so alter table catalog, create column description text after image. We've got that. Let's come in here. Alter table catalog, drop column description. Now, unbeknownst to me, it's not create column, it is add column, and we're about to experience a failure. This is cool. db migrate up. It's going to go try to do the migration. It tells us I'm about to run this thing, and then it gets this big error and it fails that migration. That's cool. That's what we wanted. It's telling us, we have the wrong syntax in our line. The stack trace is a little ugly, but it gets it done. And we see that our database is untouched. Perfect. If we look at the migrations table, it hasn't run this description migration yet. So we're ready to fix it. That's cool. Let's come in here. It's not create column, it's add column. And now we can do db migrate up. And it works. DB migrate down, and that description column is gone. We do want to add text to that column. So now that we've got it unmigrated, let's add this one. Update catalog, set description equals to the thing where product code equals test prod. Let's go get the close to the right. Let's go get that SQL from the new setup, and that's some HTML here. Here's that HTML embedded inside of a string. Great. DB migrate up. This is why I like in my tests to spin up a new database, DB migrate up, DB migrate back down, validate that I've gotten to that exact same schema that I wanted, and then, only then, do I push it against a live database. Let's take a look at our catalog, and we have the description with all of the content in place. That's great. Close all tabs. So we've gotten from our old schema, well, actually even before our old schema, we created the catalog the old way. We insert the catalog, inserted in our test product into the catalog. And then as we work through it, we also did a whole lot to ensure that the data was correct as we added all of these new fields and updated all of the data structure. Each of these migrations then will get us from a beginning state to an end state. DB migrate up, and we're ready to go. Well, let's do DB migrate reset. This will remove all of the things and get us back to no table at all. That is cool. DB migrate up, and it'll get us all the way through. Now we've got our table with all of the pieces. If we look at it, we're good. There's one more place to check in this. Now, we've done all of the migrations up and down, assuming that we only have one row in our database. Let's do that a little bit differently. DB migrate reset will reset all the way down. DB migrate up, I'm going to do only one migration. So we've only created the table. And now if we go look at that table is completely empty. That's great. So now one of the things that we did here was we created a test product. Let's say another product. The other product, this is a test, it has values. So now we will insert this into the table. And now if we look at the table, we have our product and it's ready to go. Now, as we do the migrations, we'll get to validate, is it going to set the data in this column correctly? Will there be failures where a non-null column is now null? Let's test this migration strategy. Now, this better simulates the mechanism of a production scenario where we already have some existing customer data. And that's why I like this test. DB migrate up. So now we're going to migrate all of the rest of the things. We'll create we'll add our test product, which, by the way, doesn't have the primary key of 1 anymore. We will add all of our new content. And let's go look at the database and see if it worked. Yes, that is really cool. Now we do have default data in all of these other columns. And so as expected, we didn't do anything to migrate these columns to have acceptable values, just to have non-erroring values. As we updated the text, as we did our migrations, we might choose to migrate these to known things. Maybe we have a not found image that might be a good spot instead of a blank image. Or maybe we need to set the price to, if 0 is a magic number, to something that is obviously wrong, like 1,000. And now we can go look through all of our products for anything that's 1,000 and manually set them. Or if we have a relatively defined business rule, like these product codes need to be this price range, we can start to adjust those. But what's really cool here is we were able to migrate up, migrate down, db migrate reset, db migrate up, and our database works. The only other thing we need to do now is to modify our setup file. So here in our setup file, our setup says create the database, use the database, and do a lot of stuff. We need to say create the database, and then actually let's all of these create statements will be done. Let's say run db migrate up in SQL folder, or even better, since we may not have the path hack, run npm run db up in SQL folder, and then we can do the things. Npm run db up. And now it's not so much a setup file. Probably we just want to say this is a create database file. Let's rename this to create database. And we'll put that inside. A good README along with this project telling us how to use it, and we'll be good to go. Now that it's just a create database, we don't need those parts, and we're set. The really cool thing that we did today was we took a look at database migrations. Now, database migrations is the mechanism of starting with an existing database state and migrating it to a new database state. There are two different types. There's state-based mechanisms where we just keep track of the SQL files. Arguably, we did that before we began. We were doing it manually. But we moved to a migrations-based approach where we have SQL files that define each state in our process, and we move between them. And that's really great. We created then each step to be able to create the table, to put data in our table, to add each field that we needed, together with migrating its data to acceptable values. And ultimately, we got to the place where we have a mechanism that we can start with no database or a database at any state in the middle and move to the latest state. In our build system, we'll run db migrate up against the target database before we deploy to it. And we may choose to create some other tests in here as well that will do things like validate all of our assumptions by cloning a good test database and running db migrate up and db migrate back down to get to a point where we can validate that all of our migrations work. Now, the cool part is if we just check out another version of the source code, we can run db migrate up and get up to the point where the code is without having to do a whole lot of fuss. There isn't a, oh, have you run this script yet? Just run our migrations, get it into place, and that'll be perfect. This was a lot of fun to dig into database migrations. Join us next week for the Mem Sql developer livestream as we start talking about user authentication. Remember, we're not validating the password in the admin yet, and so we'll dig into that next week. Join us again. This was a lot of fun.